Hi, this is Jamie Parker from the Millbrook Middle School Gazette. I've been investigating something really weird happening at our school for weeks now, and I think I finally figured out what's been going on. Your real teacher never returned from wherever they went, and I know where they are. 3 days ago, I was walking past the principal's office when I heard Mrs. Hayes talking to someone on the phone. She was saying stuff like, "The implementation is proceeding smoothly," and student compliance has increased by 47%. The weird thing was, Mrs. Hayes has been acting super robotic lately, always checking her watch and speaking in this flat voice. But this time, she sounded almost happy. Like, scary happy. That's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. I haven't seen my real teachers in weeks. Not the real ones. The people teaching our classes look exactly like them, but they're not the same. They know things they shouldn't know. They never get tired, and they're obsessed with keeping us on schedule. Remember how Mr. Peterson used to let us have extra time on tests if we needed it? Now he cuts us off exactly when the bell rings, even if we're in the middle of writing our names. My friend Sarah from AV Club helped me figure out what was happening. She'd been recording all the weird stuff I've been investigating, and when we played back the audio from the past month, we noticed something terrifying. The teachers' voices were getting flatter each day, like they were slowly forgetting how to sound human. And then, there's this background noise that shows up on all the recordings. This low humming that sounds like a heartbeat, but wrong. The breakthrough came when I was hiding in the supply closet near the main office. I was trying to record more evidence when I heard footsteps in the hallway. But the weird thing was, the footsteps were coming from above me, like someone was walking on the ceiling. I looked up and there was this crack in the tiles that I'd never noticed before. Cold air was coming through it, and I could hear voices. Familiar voices. That's when I heard Ms. Harrison. The real Ms. Harrison. She was saying something like, "Please, I need to get back to my students. They're depending on me." And then another voice, one that sounded exactly like her but flatter, said, "Your students are being properly educated. Your emotional attachments are inefficient." I realized there was another school above us. Or maybe below us. Or maybe between the spaces where our school exists. I don't know how to explain it, but I could hear all our real teachers up there, and they were scared. The next day I started paying closer attention to the substitute teachers. That's what they are, really. Perfect copies of our real teachers, but without the things that made them human. Mrs. June used to draw little smiley faces on our math tests when we did well. The substitute Mrs. June just writes "adequate" in red ink. Mr. Rodriguez used to tell us stories about his daughter when we were learning about family in Spanish class. The substitute Mr. Rodriguez just makes us conjugate verbs for the entire period, but here's the scariest part. They know everything about us. The substitute Ms. Harrison knows that I sit in the third row, second seat. She knows I'm left-handed. She knows I'm afraid of speaking in front of the class, but she doesn't know that I used to stay after school to help her grade papers, or that she always kept peppermint candy in her desk drawer for students who were having bad days. Tommy Rodriguez, this kid from elementary, told me something that made everything click. He said the new kid, Daniel, had been leaving him notes in his backpack, not talking to him directly, but slipping pieces of paper between his books. The notes said things like, "The pattern is almost complete, and they're making more like me." Tommy didn't understand what it meant, but I did. The entity that's been feeding on our school's routine, it's not just content with trapping Daniel anymore. It's creating an entire army of routine-obsessed teachers to spread its influence. And our real teachers are trapped somewhere, watching copies of themselves turn their students into perfectly scheduled zombies. I started noticing that students who spent more time with these substitute teachers were changing too. Marcus Thompson, who used to be this really cool high school student, now walks in perfect straight lines down the hallways. He raises his hand at exactly the same time in every class. He even blinks on a schedule, I counted. Every 7 seconds exactly. The substitute teachers were testing us constantly, but not with normal tests. They were asking us questions like, what time should you arrive at school? And how important is it to follow the daily schedule? If you answered wrong, if you said something like 5 minutes late is fine, or sometimes creativity is more important than punctuality, they would make a note in their gradebook. And the next day, you'd be a little more focused on following the rules. Sarah helped me figure out that the testing wasn't random. Students who showed the most independence, who asked the most questions, who seemed least affected by the routine, those were the ones getting tested most often, and slowly, one by one, they were becoming like Marcus. Perfect, compliant, empty. That's when Daniel started appearing to me more often. Not just in the back of classrooms anymore, but in the hallways between classes. In the bathroom mirrors, even in my dreams. His smile was different now. It looked painful, like it was being forced. And for the first time since I'd been investigating, he started talking to me directly. "Jamie," he said, appearing in my locker mirror one morning, "the pattern is almost complete. They're going to test everyone soon. The real test?" I asked him what he meant, and his smile faltered for just a second. The test that turned me into this, the one that made me forget who I was before the routine took over. But I've been remembering, Jamie, piece by piece, and I think I know how to break it. He told me that the entity wasn't just feeding on routine. It was feeding on the loss of individuality. Every student who became perfectly scheduled, every teacher who was replaced by a routine-obsessed copy made it stronger, but it also made it more vulnerable. The pattern needs everyone to be the same, Daniel explained. But patterns can be broken. If even one person remembers who they were before, really remembers, the whole thing starts to crack. He showed me something that made my blood run cold. Deep in the school's basement, behind a door that the janitor swore had never been there before, was a room full of filing cabinets. Each cabinet contained detailed records of every student who had ever attended our school. Their fears, their dreams, their personalities, everything that made them unique. And next to each record was a copy labeled Routine Compliance Version. The entity was systematically erasing what made us human and replacing it with perfect scheduled behavior. And our real teachers were being forced to watch it happen. "I was the first," Daniel whispered, his smile completely gone now. "I fought against the routine. I tried to help other students think for themselves. So they made me into a warning, a smiling, silent reminder of what happens when you don't follow the schedule." But Daniel had been fighting back in his own way. For over 20 years, he'd been planting seeds of rebellion in students like me. Students who could see him, who could hear his whispers, who were strong enough to resist the pattern. He'd been preparing for this moment. "I know where they're keeping the real teachers," he said. "And I know how to get them back. But it's going to require a sacrifice." The plan was simple, but terrifying. The entity's power came from routine and repetition. If we could disrupt the pattern at its source, the space where our real teachers were trapped, we could break the cycle. But someone would have to stay behind to make sure the pattern couldn't rebuild itself. "It has to be me," Daniel said. "I'm already trapped. But if I can break the pattern from the inside, I can set everyone free. The real teachers, the students who have been changed, all of them." I wanted to argue, to find another way, but Daniel shook his head. "I'm tired, Jamie. I've been smiling for 20 years. I want to rest." The next day, during third period, Daniel appeared to every student in the school simultaneously. Not just me, not just the ones who could usually see him. Everyone. He was standing at the back of every classroom, but for the first time he wasn't smiling. The substitute teachers couldn't see him, but they could sense something was wrong. Their perfectly scheduled lessons faltered. They started looking around nervously, checking their watches more frequently. "Students of Millbrook Middle School," Daniel said, his voice coming from everywhere at once, "remember who you were before the routine took over? Remember what you loved before you learned to love the schedule. Remember your dreams before they were replaced with compliance." The effect was immediate. Students who had been sitting perfectly straight started to slump. Kids who had been raising their hands in unison started looking around in confusion. Oh, Marcus Thompson blinked out of rhythm for the first time in weeks. The substitute teachers started to panic. They tried to regain control, shouting about the importance of following the schedule, but their voices were losing power. The pattern was breaking. "I'm sorry I couldn't help you sooner," Daniel continued. "I'm sorry I had to smile while you suffered, but I'm not going to smile anymore. that's when the building started to shake. Not like an earthquake, more like the school itself was fighting against something. The lights flickered, the clock stopped working, and the intercom system started playing backwards. Through the chaos, I could hear our real teachers calling out to us. Ms. Harrison's voice came through the walls. "Jamie! Sarah! Tommy! We're here! We're still here!" The substitute teachers were dissolving, their perfect facades cracking like masks. Underneath, there was nothing but swirling routine, bell schedules and test scores and attendance records, all mixed together into something that barely resembled a person. Daniel appeared one last time, standing in the middle of the hallway as students poured out of their classrooms. He looked different, younger, more real, but also fading. "Remember me," he said, looking directly at me. "Remember that someone fought back. Remember that the pattern can be broken." And then he was gone. Not hiding, not trapped, just gone. The shaking stopped. The lights came back on, and walking down the hallway, looking confused but real, were our teachers. The actual teachers. Ms. Harrison was crying, Mr. Peterson was hugging students, and Mrs. June was asking if everyone was okay. They remembered everything. Being trapped, watching the substitutes take over their classes, seeing their students slowly lose their individuality. They remembered, and they were angry. "We're going to make sure this never happens again," Ms. Harrison told me later, when I was interviewing her for this final report. "We're going to teach you to think for yourselves, to question authority, to value your uniqueness. We're going to make sure you never forget who you are." The students who had been changed by the routine slowly returned to normal. Marcus started blinking randomly again. The perfect attendance records disappeared from the main office. The bell started ringing at slightly different times each day, just enough to keep us from falling into a rigid pattern. But Daniel was gone. Really gone. Not trapped in a smile, not hiding in the back of classrooms, just not there anymore. He'd traded his existence for our freedom, and sometimes I wonder if we deserve it. The weird thing is nobody else seems to remember him. Not the other students, not the teachers, not even Sarah, who helped me investigate everything. They remember the substitute teachers and the strange routine, but they don't remember the smiling boy who sat in the back of every class. I am the only one who remembers Daniel. I am the only one who knows what he sacrificed to save us. And I guess that's why I'm telling you this story, because someone needs to remember. Someone needs to know that a student named Daniel fought back against the pattern, even when it cost him everything. So here's my advice. If you're listening to this and you notice your teachers acting strange, or your school getting too focused on routine, or if you see a kid in the back of your class who's always smiling but never speaks, pay attention, ask questions, break the pattern before it breaks you. And if you ever see Daniel, if somehow, somewhere, he's still fighting the good fight, tell him Jamie Parker remembers. Tell him his sacrifice mattered. Tell him that because of him, we learned that being different isn't something to be cured. This has been Jamie Parker, reporting for the Millbrook Middle School Gazette. Stay weird, stay curious, and never let anyone schedule your dreams. Remember, Daniel. Remember that the pattern can be broken. And remember that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to smile when you're told to. This concludes our investigation into the strange events at Millbrook Middle School. The Gazette will continue to report on student issues, but from now on, we'll also be watching for any signs that the pattern might be trying to return. Because Daniel taught us that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and some stories are too important to forget.